I'm Catherine Tomlinson and I started an eco-conscious pottery company called Oxford Clay. So I don't just make pottery, I make resources for other potters wanting to be more eco-friendly in their pottery practice. And that's what this podcast is all about. It's about sharing everything I've learned along my eco-conscious pottery journey with you. And I'm so glad you're here with me. Let's go. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm Catherine Tomlinson, and in today's episode, we're going to be talking about clay clay bodies. And what on earth is a clay body, and what's everyone talking about? When you hear the term clay body in pottery and ceramics, what does it mean? So that's what this episode is all about. We're going to be investigating a little bit about like what clay is actually made of, and also whether if you wanted to try and make your own clay body, how you would go about doing it. Okay, so first of all, what is a clay body? Okay, so this is a term that you see often used in pottery books, or you might have heard it spoken, but I've mainly seen it in books to describe clay. Okay, so clay body and clay are the same thing. So when you see the term clay body, just think, oh, they're talking about clay. And to be honest, I'm not really sure why it's referred to as a clay body. Perhaps maybe because, if you think about your pot kind of like as the body of the work, and then you're laying maybe some decoration or a glaze on top. That's what I thought maybe it could be referred to. That's the reason I thought maybe it's referred to as the clay body. But so generally it's a kind of technical term which refers to clay in pottery. Okay, so clay bodies, clay, are in the pottery industry, they're mostly made by companies. So there'll be like pottery companies that make clays, like different types of clay, and also some potters will make their own clay bodies. So in a bit we'll go into why a potter would do that, and how they would do that basically. So clay bodies, clays, mostly made by companies. So there's lots of, in the UK, for example, there's sort of maybe 6 companies, main companies that would make clay that are, commercially available clays. And what they are is they're mixes of different ingredients. And they're collected together by these suppliers. They're collected together usually as powders, and then they're mixed to give kind of ideal properties for different things. So what they will do is they will maybe make a clay which is a stoneware clay, or a clay that's like an earthenware clay. They'll maybe have like a red earthenware clay, which will have lots of iron in, naturally occurring iron that will make the clay red. Or they will have maybe like a white earthenware clay. I've done a completely different episode actually on earthenware and stoneware and the difference between them. If you're interested to know more about that, there's another podcast episode on it. And it's basically just to do with the firing temperature of each one and the maximum firing temperature. So different ingredients will have different temperatures that they can fire at. And so, if it's a lower firing clay and it starts to melt at higher temperatures, then that will be an earthenware clay, and it can be red or white, other shades in between, kind of browny. And then, there'll be a whole collection of stoneware clays as well. So they will fire, generally they'll fire like higher, could be like a porcelain clay as well. And they will fire like higher again. So that's what like pottery suppliers do. They collect the ingredients together and they're making those clays for specific uses. So it could be throwing, it could be hand building. So might want a clay which has got a lot of strength for hand building. You might want a clay which is very smooth for throwing, so it doesn't sort of hurt your hands as you're throwing the pot. You might want a very thin clay, a very sort of translucent porcelain clay, a very fine clay, or you might want like a more plastic clay. So these ingredients, clay ingredients, are collected together by those pottery suppliers. They're mixed together and they're made into different types of clay body. Okay, so what are the ingredients that are used by pottery suppliers, or potters to make clay bodies out of? So I have to say, this was something that really surprised me when I first started making pottery. I thought it was like, I don't know, I guess I just thought clay was like dug up from the ground and then like potters just used it. But actually, that's not the case. Clay is one ingredient in clay bodies, in clay. But there are loads of other ingredients that are added to make that clay into the exact kind of like behave in the way that potters want it to behave in, or give the right color, or give the right properties. Okay, so some of the ingredients are powdered rocks. So they will be rocks like feldspar, could be quartz, could be flint or talc. Another ingredient that's added to clays is obviously clay itself. So they could be ball clays. There's lots of different types of ball clays depending on where they're like found in the world, and different ones will have like different kind of mineral and trace metal compositions. So for example, some of them have a higher iron content and they're coloured according to that, because they've got iron in them. And some of them more plastic, less plastic, when water's added to them. So generally these will be like dry powdered ingredients, and they're mixed together at the powdered stage. So other ingredients could be, for example, animal bone ash. So that's added. That's usually from bovine or pig bones, and they're basically baked and then ground into a powder. So some potters use those, like I don't use them, but some potters would use them maybe to make like a bone china clay. So yeah, bone ash is sometimes added to clays to make bone china, a ratio of about 50% bone to other ingredients. And then there could be other ingredients that are used to kind of strengthen clay. So that could be, it could be this a substance known as grog, which is when clay is actually fired and then it's ground into a powder. So it's already been fired, ground into a powder, like bisque fired, and then it's then added back into clay, into like wet clay, and that just really adds strength to the clay. Other things that could be added are sand and also grit. So generally those ingredients are added to clays that where you need the clay to be very strong. Say like you're building like a big sort of hand-built sculpture. There's a commercially available clay called crank, which has got a lot of grit in it, and that's really good for like sculpting because it's very, very strong. It stays where you want it to. It stays where you want it to stay. When you're sculpting. Rather than kind of like being, like a very sort of plastic clay might sort of flop if you were trying to kind of make something out of it. It might all just like collapse, sort of thing. Okay, so those are the ingredients that are generally used in clay bodies. And like I said, commercial companies, clay, producing suppliers, pottery suppliers, will take those ingredients at different ratios and they will make different clays depending on the use that potters need them for. Okay, so let's move on to like making your own clay body. So why on earth would a potter make their own clay body? Because it's quite a kind of labor intensive process. You basically have to get all the ingredients together in the right ratios. So generally they'll be all like powders. You have to add water, enough water to be able to mix up the clay and to mix all the ingredients together. And then you usually have to dry it out again because, you can't really use like wet, really wet clay. So you would need to then like dry it out again. And then you would need to wedge it or knead it, into a kind of usable state to make sure all those ingredients are like really mixed together, like really, really well. So yeah, then quite often actually as an industrial process, they're passed, clay bodies would be passed through some kind of like, shaper or compressor. So a machine like that is known as a pug mill. In a kind of studio pottery, you can get machines called pug mills, and you basically put the clay in at the top, and then it's like squashed out, into a kind of usable state at the bottom, and it kind of all just helps to kind of like get all those, clay molecules, squash them all together, and then it helps the clay to be in like a nice, usable state that then you can just like chop up, wedge, and use in your pottery. So yeah, what a palaver. Why would anyone do that? So there's three reasons why potters would make their own clay bodies. So just to say, not that many potters make their own clay bodies. Generally potters would just use commercial clay, from those big bags from pottery suppliers. They would just order the clay in and they would use it. It's very convenient. They're wrapped in plastic bags and you can just like take a bit off that you need, wrap it up, put it back again. But so there are three reasons though why potters might make their own clay body. Okay, so the first reason is that they might want the clay to have very specific properties. So, for example, they might want it to be like we were talking about in terms of strength. They might need a really, really strong clay. They might want it to be like really rough. So they might like want to add like extra grit, extra grog to that clay. They might want it to be, they might want a very sort of translucent clay. So they might say like want a porcelain, and then they want to maybe like add some paper to it to make it like super strong, that then, burns out at the bisque firing stage. And then they're left with like this really thin piece of like really translucent clay. I've seen actually potters sculpting with really translucent clay, and then they can kind of like shine a light through it, to make lamps and stuff, and it's so beautiful. So like it could just be that like they need to create special clay for their own purposes. So that's one option. The properties of the clay, they could be wanting to get like specific properties. Okay, so the second reason that potters would create their own clay body is that they might want a specific kind of like color or look to the clay. So clay properties is one reason, but they might want a clay which is like for example, like very, very white for porcelain, or they might want a clay which is like very, very red with like lots of iron in it, or they might want to be adding, extra color to that clay. I've got like an example of this actually. I went to the ceramics fair, the Oxford Ceramics Fair. I went a few years ago, and I was talking to a potter who actually makes like very beautiful thin porcelain pots on the wheel, like throws them on the wheel. And I was sort of talking, I was like, I really love like hearing about like, other potters, like their process. And so I was like, so asking like, what's your making process and how do you do this and that? And they were basically, they told me that the clay they use, they have to ship it in specifically from a specific area of the world where they feel like the porcelain is like the right color for them to make their work. So they said they tried other porcelains from, other areas of the world, and then they decided on, this very specific porcelain for its color. So that could be one reason. Like potters, they want a very specific like aesthetic to their work, and they can only get that by like collecting those ingredients together. They can't buy it commercially. Basically, they're trying to make too specialist a product to be able to like just buy that clay off the shelf. So that's the second reason. And then the third reason, and this is the reason that I started making my own clay, because why would anyone do that like otherwise, is because I wanted to know exactly where all the ingredients in my clay came from. So I wanted to have like absolute control over like what I was putting in the clay and where it came from, and I wanted to know exactly the origin of all the ingredients I was using. So what I do is I actually make my own slip, my own casting slip, and so I use like several different ingredients. I use china clay from Cornwall in the UK. And I use ball clays also from southwest England in the UK, and I use feldspar and quartz from Europe. from different parts of Europe. And the reason I've picked all those ingredients is because I want to know that they are mined in areas where I've sort of researched in terms of like the legislation. Is legislation protecting like workers that are mining or maybe processing the material, and is it protecting the environment as far as possible where the materials are mined from. So that's why I chose those particular ingredients. I also didn't want them to come from like too far away. So there was in terms of like, say for example, the China clay I use it in my slip. I could have picked a China clay mined, far away from the UK, or I could pick one mined from Cornwall in the UK. So it's Groleg, which is mined in Cornwall. So it's like I know that China clay has come less far than like another material that might have come, from further afield, sort of thing. So that's the reason I make my own clay, because like you can buy slip commercially, casting slip, absolutely. But I just really wanted to know exactly what was in my casting slip. So actually, if you're interested in the exact casting slip recipe that I use, it's in the book Eco-Friendly Pottery: 30 Simple Ways to Make Your Pottery Practice More Ethical and Sustainable. So you can get that from Amazon or the Oxford Clay website as well. And yeah, that's got the exact casting slip recipe in, and I also add paper actually to that recipe, and that makes it really, really strong, and it doesn't crack, and it's amazing. So that's, if you wanted a casting slip recipe, it's in there. And if you wanted, just to use that basically as a clay, if you wanted to maybe throw on the wheel with it, you can use exactly the same recipe that's in that book, with the China clay, feldspar, quartz, and ball clays. You can use that exact same recipe. You just don't put any what's called a deflocculant in it. So the deflocculant is the crucial thing which makes the clay like really, really runny. It's like a chemical that you add. And that, again, the recipe is in the book, but you would just leave out the deflocculant, and then you would have, your clay wouldn't be as runny, and you could just kind of like, you would still need to add a bit more water to kind of get it to the consistency where it all would mix together, but then you could dry it out and you could wedge it and just use it as clay. The clay body. So I actually do that. So when I've finished casting and I've got all these like little scraps, of clay, I basically reclaim them in a reclaiming bin, and then I actually don't use that clay for casting slip anymore. I actually use that clay for throwing. So that's when I wedge it all up together, and I use that clay for throwing as a kind of normal clay body. So exactly the same ingredients. It's just that it's it can't really be used as casting slip anymore. The deflocculant is kind of like degraded to the point where it's not runny clay anymore. It's kind of dried. It's not really going to work as casting slip. So I just like wedge it all together, and then it's like an actual just normal clay body that I can use. Okay, so those are the reasons why a potter may want to make their own clay body. So do you need to make your own clay body? No, absolutely not. Like I said, if you don't need to make your own clay body for those 3 reasons, or you don't want to, or just like happy using like commercial clay, absolutely do that. It's way less bother, way less labor, like way less work than than making your own clay. And like there's loads of commercial clays out there, and for fantastic clays for all different purposes. Like I said, specially blended for specific purposes: stoneware, earthenware, different colors. Throwing clay, hand building clay. There's so much out there. So you absolutely do not need to be making your own clay body. But if you want to, then you absolutely can. So happy potting until next episode. I hope that was like interesting. Like I said, I've always been super confused about what a clay body was. Why people were calling it clay body when it was just clay. It was really confusing, but now I hope that's become clearer to you. It's definitely become clearer to me as I've kind of been doing pottery a bit longer, and now I understand that clay and clay body is exactly the same thing. Yeah, okay, so happy potting until next time, and thank you so much for joining me on this episode. Goodbye. So, if you enjoyed that and you're interested to learn more about eco-conscious pottery, head over to the Oxford Clay website, which is www.oxfordclay.co.uk. I can't wait to see you there.